our partner at Lightbox VC. I was at a session with Sid, and I heard him talking and got to know a little bit more about his profile and background. And I found, him to be a great person to come and speak to our audience, which consists of both the investors as well as startup founders, because he has wore both the hats. So, before we get into the introduction of Sid, moving to the next slide, a quick introduction about IPV for those of you who are logging in for the first time. IPV is an angel platform. We have been around for a little under 3 years, but in 3 years, it has been a phenomenal success. Thank you to all of you, our investors, our startup founders, who have made this journey successful so far. Our membership base is over 4,000. We have invested in 80 plus startups. Of course, to get there, we have evaluated close to 3,700 startups, and actually more, because it does not include all the competitions and all that we attend. This has been possible through the effort of a lot of our investors who not only invest with us, but help us evaluate startups, help us in due diligence, and also provide strong post-investment support. The outcome of that is that out of the 35 startups we had invested in till August 2020, we have one failure. There is another startup which will return about 50-60%. There is one return of capital, but in addition to that, 8 exits, 1 unicorn exit, 18 follow-ons, and we are expecting some good exits from there as well, and soon. So moving to the next slide, please. One of the ways we have been able to build this is through our partnership with communities. We are partnering with some of the leading educational institutions of the country with a twofold objective: get the like-minded investors on our platform, and also build strong relationships with the entrepreneurship cells, the professors, the students, the alums of these institutions, so that we get a first access to the startups coming out of these prestigious institutions. So if you are part of any of these communities and want to join them, you can use the QR code or the link shared in the chat window. If you don't see your university here but want it to be a part, please again use the QR code and guide us there. So with that, let me not waste any time and introduce you to the man of the hour, Sid Talwar. He started working for Skadden Apps, a very high-profile New York City-based law firm, a firm I worked a lot, Sid, in my previous career as an investment banker when I was doing banking for Citigroup and the Credit Suisse in New York, London. So I can tell you, one of the most difficult law firms to get into. We will get to know more about his journey from there, because he came back to India and founded Evolve, a vocational training company, which was funded by Singapore Technologies and then acquired by NIIT. Post which he worked for NIIT for another 3 years on few projects. Post that, he became, started Lightbox, and where he has been an investor in some, marquee companies like the Dunzo, Cleartrip, Bombay Shirt Company, Furlanco, Imbibe. Something we'll get to know about his personality today. He also launched a restaurant called the Hungry Monkey, which has won multiple national awards and international recognition. A restaurant I used to frequent, it's in Delhi. I have frequented, a couple of times, and truly enjoyed my time there. So with that, Sid, welcome to our session, and we look forward to hearing from you over the next 50 plus minutes.
Thank you. Hold on, let me just see if I can start. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction as well, Ankur. Looking forward to it. Excellent,
Sid. So, Sid, if I go back to your profile, right, I see a lawyer, then I see an entrepreneur, then I see an investor, then I see a guide, companion, and then I see a restaurateur, right? Which of these hats was the toughest to wear, and why?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm actually not a lawyer, so that would be the toughest hat. I used to do economic analysis for them. For their project. They did a lot of project finance at the time, especially for Enron and companies like that that don't exist anymore. So, but I wasn't a lawyer, so that's the toughest hat. I think being an entrepreneur is by far the toughest thing, and Lightbox would be like a second entrepreneurial journey for me. And I think it's very exciting, but I think very scary at the same time. So by far the most difficult thing.
Excellent. Well, we have a lot of our founders on this call today. And this is what I tell. I mean, IPV is a entrepreneurial journey for four of us who started IPV. I totally hear where you're coming from. And leaving behind the job, the security of it, or the career prospects, and starting something you believe in. Totally understand, it can be nerve-wracking. And so therefore, whenever I'm speaking to founders, it straight away comes from an area of respect, that we know that, they've already taken the first tough decision to try to do something which goes against the basic grain. So, okay. So moving on to the next question, as luck would have, as luck would have it, in the last 1.5 years, we are now seeing a surge of vocational training startups that are coming in this space, right? Upskilling, skilling, it is becoming the new buzzword. But you identified this opportunity way back. So from the time you started Evolve to what you're seeing today in this space, what are the main, differences, challenges, opportunities you are seeing in this space?
So I think the big opportunity, of course, is the internet. When I started there, the internet was almost non-existent in India. The connectivity was non-existent in India, but the need was definitely there. And I think, we keep seeing the need for and vocational training is really bite-sized training. And we keep seeing the need for these capsules of learning through the journey of adulthood, more and more, because the kind of vocations and occupations that one can get are changing and evolving quicker than they ever have before. And I'd seen that at that time because of the advent of the call centers and BPOs that needed different skill sets for people to be able to start doing that work. And then from that point, a slew of different kinds of technology products that also needed certain skill sets and couldn't be learned on the job. But the need of lots of people was there. And so the problem was accessing people. And then once you access them, giving them space to sit and to learn. So those are some of the challenges that I faced at that time. Today, the challenges is just to keep up with what you need to be learning, because it's at such a fast pace, and there's so many different things that that you can go out and try to learn. And of course, knowing that you're being able to teach it. I was teaching things that others had already learned in the past. So I wasn't reinventing a wheel, so to say. I was just bringing a lot of the invented wheel to an audience in India that didn't have access to it in the past. Today, the learnings are significantly there aren't enough places that you can learn about certain tools and certain ways that are needed for the jobs that you want out there. So you're creating that, and when you're creating education in any form, it's a long-term journey because you don't know what the result is going to be. So if I want to start a company that's going to deliver books like Amazon, I have a pretty good idea of how well I'm doing when someone actually orders a book and I get that book to that person. But in education, it takes time to see if someone's actually learned it. Then you're going to have to test that person. Then you have to be able to give that person, some sort of a certificate for that. So it's a very long process. And you also don't know whether you're teaching everyone the right way or not. So it's a very evolved way of trying to run a business, which is why I'm always scared when education companies grow very quickly, because you don't know if you've actually got the learnings in place before you start spreading to a very large audience. Another learning that I had, when I raised my several rounds of venture funding for my company, I started promoting how well the business was going based on the number of people that were learning, rather than necessarily being able to attribute success of learning to those people.
Awesome. For this is an open AMA session. ask me anything. So please use the Q&A window to ask your questions, please, and I'll take them up. Sid, just continuing with that reasoning. So, fundraising and then ultimate sale to an IIT. How was the fundraising and M&A environment at that time compared to what we have today?
So the fundraising environment, I raised my first round of capital in 2000, end of 2000. It was non-existent almost. A bunch of call centers had done it, like, and those guys were like Sanjeev Agarwal, who now, had Helion, etc., had Dux, and, they're from I think, Spectramind, and they're, Raman Roy, and so there were a few of these guys that had raised money, and of course, Chris Cap had launched their fund around that time, but there really wasn't an environment of, especially angel investing at all. So I actually, traveled. I was lucky enough to get funding from the Singapore government sovereign fund. They had recently at that time, they didn't even have a structure of their sovereign fund. Today they have GIC and Vertex and Temasek. They were really investing out of different government institutions. Airtel had Bharti Airtel had just received money from the Singapore Telecom, which pretty much today would have been GIC investing rather than them investing. So I was lucky enough to be able to receive that. When I sold my business, which was in 2007, the venture community was just starting out, and in any kind of significant way. And I was also kind of just learning about what all that meant. And so actually I sold my business rather than taking venture. Let's say that was a series, it would have been like a Series C at that time, because I didn't understand exactly how I would get along with venture capitalists. So it very, very different. And I think if we spoke 7 years from now, we would probably be saying the same thing about this environment versus 7 years from now as well.
This is, really different timing, but, entrepreneurship loss is an investor gain, and actually ultimately a success for entrepreneurship because of all the ventures you are supporting. Moving from being an entrepreneur to an investor, right? What was the change in your thinking? Like, entrepreneurs by nature are supposed to be overly optimistic, right? There is no other way you can succeed. Even in the worst of times, you will think that I can still make it work. But as an investor, you probably may have to be a little skeptical. So how did that transition happen? And is this transition even necessary? Do you need to be wearing a different hat, or the same hat can continue?
So actually, I think it's the same hat. There are changes. There are changes in mentality, but I think venture capitalists have to be even more optimistic sometimes than entrepreneurs, because you don't have any control. You can't do anything. So I think the big mental change is that you have to be you have to sit in the back seat, and you're not a backseat driver. You're just sitting in the back seat of a bus, and the passengers keep coming onto the bus, and those are all different investors perhaps, and it's kind of moving. And if you're an early investor, you keep getting sent more and more back of the bus, so the founder can hear you less and less, no matter how how much how loud you are, but you have to be you have to be massively optimistic, and you have to kind of believe, and when you get called on to support, you got to run to the front of the bus, and not ignore that call. So I think you really need to be optimistic. Having said that, you need to be able to give up control. I think entrepreneurs, just in general, you're a control freak to a large extent, and then over time, as you mature, you give control up, and you learn how to give that control up and give that power up in the right way, and you find different things that you need to do to be part of a larger team. But initially, you're controlling so much of your own destiny, and I think venture capitalists absolutely don't do that. They don't control any part of their destiny almost, and I think if you're very execution and operational focused, and that's what drives you, I think this is a very difficult job for you. And I think for me, I think I started in venture capital when I was about 33, I think, or so, and I started my company, my Evolve, when I was 22, and I felt that I didn't want to be operationally involved anymore. And I think it was a very clear thing for me, saying I'm not going to miss it. And I meet people all the time, especially entrepreneurs who in our market currently that have exited and then start angel investing, or are angel investing while running their businesses. And they keep saying, I'm not going to join a venture fund because I don't know if I can give up another opportunity to start another company and execute again. And I think that's a very important decision in life, to move away from execution and say, I'm not going to execute. I am going to strictly look for businesses. It's a mental state. Yeah.
Very interesting. Never thought about it like that, but yeah, very interesting. But looking at your investments, there's something more interesting, right? In all of the tech startups you as Lightbox have invested, when people were investing in marketplaces, particularly there were a lot of furniture marketplaces that came up. You went ahead and invested in Fallenco, which is into subscription for furniture. Then similarly, when people were investing in food delivery businesses, you went and invested in Rebel Foods, which is Cloud Kitchen, which is going to. So the question is, they look like a anti-market or a anti-trend kind of investments. They may not be, but they just look like it. So is there any investment philosophy behind it at work, or it just happened by by design in another way?
This is definitely not anti-market at all.
They're definitely successful. They're definitely successful and unicorns, Rebel Foods. So I will say that it succeeded, but okay, anti-trend might be a better word.
So I think there are two ways that you can invest, and I didn't make this up. Actually, I read this quite a long time ago, actually, and I'm forgetting now, and that's horrible of me, but I'm forgetting who it was who kind of had said this. But you can either invest thematically, or you can have a thesis and invest behind the thesis. And so your thematic investments would be like, you're getting into certain things within education or social media or social networking, and you're kind of moving in that direction. We haven't really done that. And I think for a fund our size, and we make a very small number of investments, I actually believe that it is much more difficult to succeed in a thematic approach. Instead, we look at a very thesis-driven approach. So we build theses 5 years, 10 years out on where India is going to be, let's say, for example. And we're saying, okay, if India is going to be in that direction, then what are the kinds of companies that will do well then? And our thesis then, now if your thesis is wrong, you're going to fail. But if you spend the time thinking about where life is going to be in the geography or the sectors that you're looking at investing in, and you draw a thesis out, if you can be detailed enough in your thought process, in your thesis, you'll do very well. And so we drew a thesis out, and we keep evolving that thesis in our minds because India keeps changing. We're not investing all over the world. We invest in India. We invest in, and to a large extent, we're investing in Indian consumers. There's certain things that will stay standard, and there's certain things that will evolve and change. And we're kind of moving along the lines of how will things change, what will stay the same. And so as a result of certain things changing and certain things staying the same, what are the businesses that are hopefully should take advantage of that, be able to take advantage of that? And I think that's what we look for in companies, rather than saying, food delivery is going to succeed over Cloud Kitchen or vice versa. We would never look at it like that.
Good to know. So I'm going to eliminate all the questions on what sectors do you focus on. So
no, and that's absolutely right. We don't. We don't have a focus like that, where we do like to look at certain spaces and dive into spaces and say, okay, this is an exciting space. Can I start meeting companies in that space? But quite honestly, things, India is such an execution heavy country. If you finding the right people to do a business, it could be almost in any space. And I think that's the great thing about having an India thesis. It's kind of a massive blank canvas, tabula rasa, right? And so you have the opportunity to do so much. It's if you find the right team, it's almost impossible to make a mistake.
Very well put. Also, if we look at some of your investments, like in Zoom, Falenco, investments you made as far back as 2015, and you still invested in them in some form, shape, or manner. So what is your philosophy on exiting?
Okay. Okay.
More importantly, when do you think the investors should exit?
So that's a good question. That's a difficult question to answer. And I'll be honest. There are a couple of things to think about in this. First of all, it's a misnomer to believe that investors make the decisions on this generally. Unless you're trying to sell a little portion of your stake, exits are normally decided by the founder and the founding management team. And they take the call, and as board members, we're really there to kind of accept that or say yes to that. But there are times, and now in the secondary markets are now so hot that you can look at maybe offloading certain parts of your stake. But my overall view on this is that you have to let your winners run as long as you can. And just to your point right now, the companies that you just mentioned, they were started in 2014, 2015. As you mentioned, they're like 5, 6, 6 years old. They're little babies. And the biggest fear that I always have is, are we going to be selling too early? And I think we over and over again, you kind of you're seeing the missteps globally that others have taken by releasing their equity too early. So when you have a portfolio company that has category creators, like what Falenco is, like you mentioned, category leader, a company that's well managed, that's growing at 50, 60, 80, 100% year on year, delivering economics that are improving. They have little existential threat to the leadership they've already created in the market. You want to be there for the ride. And quite honestly, it probably takes 5, 7 years to figure all that stuff out. So it's only at that point that you really, unless, there are some cases, and the problem is we only read about those cases, but there's such few cases where that's expedited. But you can't bet on that being expedited. You're kind of, and so if you're 5 or 7 years out, that's really when this company is starting to take off, especially if they've got this framework with, being a creator of that space, being a leader in that space, being able to execute and create a well-developed team that's able to manage. All those things are only happening in the 7th year. And quite honestly, you're seeing, companies that are 40 years old right now that are reinventing themselves, like Microsoft or, even Apple back in 2000. And you have companies that we believe are fully matured in our minds, like Zomato is only 10 years old, or 11 years old. They have such a long way to go. So companies that are 5 or 6 years old, we haven't even seen the tipping point of what real value creation can be. So that's a very roundabout way of saying to you that we see our winners and we say that, we're going to wait. We're going to wait and watch, and we're going to take advantage of the momentum that has taken them this long to develop. We're going to take advantage of that momentum going forward and give them the opportunity to create more and more value.
Yeah, but So this is something that we often get. So the difference is that us as angel investors, so we often just end up taking few cap table seats on the company, and so when investors like you and other VCs come in, there is also a desire to clean up the cap table and create those exit opportunities. At which stage we also take a tactical decision on what is in the longer term interest of the startup, because you don't want to also be a hindrance into the growth path of the startup, for them to go forward, raise bigger money. So, as angel investors, we sometimes have to probably take an angel decision to take an exit when it's available. And also a lot of times to just circulate capital, because, not everybody will have a holding up power for 7 years plus, like keep investing for 2, 3 years and then holding up for 7. But interesting perspective from our startup founders who are looking and hopefully at some stage getting invested by Lightbox. So one question that we see a lot these days, Sid, is so many startups getting the unicorn status. Startups that are coming to even us, a lot of them we sometimes feel are at some frothy valuation, but even if we say no at some startups at some valuation, we still hear and read about them getting funded by somebody or the other. The question for you is, how do you think about startup valuations?
So, this question also actually comes back to a difference in kind of investing at different stages. And I think your earlier point right now on angels having to exit earlier is also a stage thing. I think one of the big things that institutions try to do is get enough rights not to be pushed into selling when they don't want to, which is the flip side. I don't think we experience that as much. And you're absolutely right. In a lot of cases, unfortunately, because of the lack of rights that angels have, especially if they're not part of a community that is investing together, which is why it's always interesting to kind of see the differences between that. But they perhaps are put under a lot of pressure. On the flip side, there are also angels that, like you mentioned, want liquidity, or for reasons outside of just for right decision making. They need liquidity at certain times, and so they sell earlier than perhaps they would ideally wanted to. Now that also takes place with us because we have to return capital. And so I know 9 times out of 10 we're going to have to sell earlier than we would ideally want to. So you obviously have to be able to balance this. And as you become richer as angel investors and institutions become larger and more powerful, those things dissipate a little bit. And so, but you're absolutely right. And exactly the same thing in your current question. So when you're valuing a startup, it quite honestly, and I'll flip this around to the other side as far as entrepreneurs are concerned as well. But as an investor, the first thing we always think about is dilution of founder shares. Now, there are a lot of times, I'll tell you, even after we believe we thought about it, they don't agree. And a lot of times they do agree, and then years later they don't agree. And which is completely fine. I think we do this for a living. Most entrepreneurs that, so we do it over and over again. Most entrepreneurs doing it for the first time. That's also going to change. We're already seeing many more second-time entrepreneurs, and you can see how, people who have done it before think about this differently. But ideally, there are certain thumb rules that we try to bear in mind as far as ownership is concerned, and specifically ownership of founders. And you don't take a cap table and go all the way out to maybe 4 or 5 rounds out and say, well, what will their ownership be if they raise the kind of money that we think they're going to have to raise at the values that we think they're going to have to, that they might be able to get? Where will they end up? And then give some leeway on that. And that's really what it is. Early on, no matter whether you have product market fit or you have you have some revenue. You're not really using a number to create a valuation as you would much later on in a business, or and going into pre-IPO and IPO rounds, especially. Here, you're just trying to maintain a balance that can be fair. And I think that's definitely something that we bear in mind. The other one thing I would say on this is, if you really, we're looking at businesses, we're not looking at businesses that could perhaps become a $200 million business tomorrow, or a $400 million business. We're looking at businesses that, potentially could become multi-billion dollar businesses. When you're looking at a business that can become a multi-billion dollar business, and you're thinking about how to keep the entrepreneur equity at a certain level, the difference between trying to get a value of 35 million, 50 million, 75 million is much less important than if you are investing in a company that you think, yeah, 100, will they get to 100 million tomorrow? Now, all of a sudden, this valuation becomes a lot more important. We don't invest in businesses thinking like that. And so in our mind, if we're investing in a business, that business is going to have the potential of exploding. And so, and we've learned that. We used to really think hard, because we're all learning. We're all very new at this. The whole ecosystem is very new compared to other countries. We used to think, oh my God, what if we don't own X amount of shares in the company? What happened? Nothing happens. I think it's so much more important for value generation for you to be flexible in your thinking in order for others to be happy around the table, especially the founders, especially the ESOP pool. And you give in knowing that the incremental amount of valuation you're giving up means nothing in the larger scheme of things. If the larger scheme of things isn't large enough, then you're investing in the wrong business.
Fair point. That's I often make that argument when I'm presenting a startup. It's, when people ask me, oh, Ankur, how do you justify a valuation for a pre-product company at this amount? And I'm like, because I'm not looking at the valuation I'm getting in, I'm looking at the valuation at which I'm getting out. And if the valuation at which I'm getting out is still a very large enough valuation, then, some variability of 5-10% here and there should not change my decision. Because if it's a bad startup, then at no valuation, it is good startup. And if it is a good valuation, if it's a good startup, but of course, at the end of the day, it has to be still reasonable valuation, right? I mean, in the sense that it has to still make sense at some level, otherwise, especially at the stage at which we are coming in, there will be absolute no control. Awesome. So those are some of the questions, we had received and I had prepared, but now I'm getting a lot of questions, so I'll just start. So one of the things is that, a lot of startups, like a lot of funds like Sequoia and all, they've all started doing under some different program, early stage investing. Is that something that you at Lightbox have, considered, discarded, or thinking about?
Are you talking about like angel
No,
level?
not angels. Like, they come in with a small check, even at angel round, right? Like Sequoia Search comes in, and I've got some big funds that started writing like 100, 150. They co-invest with us just to get a skin in the game. So we get a lot of requests from VCs saying that, okay, whatever you putting in, take 150, 200 from us at this stage, and then we'll see it up, like, once it becomes part of a portfolio. But of course, they run it as a separate program. Is it something that has been discussed, considered at Lightbox as well?
No, not really. I think if anything, we want to try to invest more and more slightly later. And it really comes from not because we want to look for only later stage businesses, but we want to be able to continuously back companies that we believe will continue to grow. And so if we have extra capital, we'd rather just keep putting it in them rather than starting very early. I also feel like to a large extent, we have a 10-year, 12-year life. And like I was saying to you earlier, in that life cycle, if a company starts really on average creating a tipping point of value in year 6 or 7, because you've started investing very early, you've lost 7 years. That perhaps if you had invested slightly later, you would have more time on your end. And so I think, and I think this is going to change and evolve in India, but I think like it has in the US, where companies start getting valued, a lot more companies start getting valued a lot faster or grow a lot faster than they used to. We're already seeing that, but in so far, this, 5 to 7 years, it just feels like that's how long it takes for companies to kind of evolve, and get to a certain stage of truly being able to execute at a level that creates a lot more value in businesses faster. And so at least for now, we're trying to invest slightly later than what you just mentioned. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Somebody has to invest at that stage also for us to get those big long-term exits.
That's not us either.
So, question from Amrit. What are the few key things you look at when deciding on a yay or a nay decision on a startup?
Founders. What she thinks, how she thinks, whether we believe that they're going to be able to manage. That's it. In other countries, you need to find mousetraps. The US is a great example. In India, you don't need that. What you need is someone who has tremendous grit. And you need someone, in our opinion, you need someone who needs to be able to execute, either themselves or have the ability to get a team around them that has that ability. I think if I look back at anything that we had invested in, personal capacity or within the fund, the reason they failed was just execution. I don't think and what's crazy about that is all those ideas are great. That means someone else is going to come in and will figure out that idea because they were able to execute. And so I think we clearly look for that. And most of the time we're learning, what that idea is and why that makes sense. So very infrequently will we see an idea and say, wow, that just does not make any sense. It's not frequent enough that I see that. Most times I look at an idea and this was the first thing you said, right? The optimism kicks in. Whoa, that's a great idea. And this is why I'd hate hearing ideas in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, because every idea sounds like a great idea in 30 minutes. I don't know what advice I can give you. It sounds great. You should go and do it. But I think the time that we take to make a decision is really the time we're taking to get deeper with the founder, to get to know them better, get comfort around their ability to do this job, and their ability to execute. Not everyone is a founder. And I think unfortunately, the one cultural aspect in our country that's coming out is, if you're not a founder, you're no good. But we don't realize you need a village, right? A founder is one person. If the founder doesn't have the people, putting together the rest of the company, the founder is not going to go anywhere. And some people are much better at being the head of operations or the head of finance or the head of HR or in a product role or an engineering role rather than being the founder. That doesn't make you less important or a failure, which I hear a lot in this, which is unfortunate. But some people just aren't designed for that particular role, and I think to a large extent it's our job to determine whether we think you're designed for that role or not. With all due respect from our side, of course. So that's what we look for. Market is very secondary. Most markets need something in India, and they're probably just wide open holes that a lot of people see. not just that particular founder.
But what about if it's an overexposed space, right? I'm just working on that question. So if it's an overexposed space, there's too much competition, too many players already in, well funded, and one good, great founder, founder who has some resilience.
Do it. Yeah. In fact, we do this over and over again. I mean, the bigger deal is thinking that the space isn't going to get overheated. Quite honestly, and it's funny, Ankur, that you say this. I'll tell you one. I'll tell you one easy one for me. We invested in Dunzo. There was no such thing as quick commerce in our country. No one was doing it, and we were like, well, there's no competition. Well, today, I think my mom is starting a quick commerce company, and so it's just it's not that you're jumping into a space because it's not crowded or it is crowded. If a space is exciting, it's going to get crowded. You're jumping on a founder's back that's going to navigate that space better than anyone else and is going to create the best company. And your expectation is that it's going to get crowded. And if it isn't crowded, if it's not crowded, it is not going to get crowded, then there might be a problem with the space to begin with. And so absolutely, cloud kitchens is exactly the same thing. The word cloud kitchen didn't exist when we invested in what was at that time called Fasos. They were a quick service restaurant for delivery. That's pretty much what it was, with phone calls, for 85% of their orders. It evolved, and now there's a cloud kitchen in every neighborhood. So yeah, that's irrespective. You're looking for the right person.